Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 45, featuring Brown Eagle, CEO of Decolonized Capital. Welcome, Brown Eagle. How you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So excited to have you here. So welcome to Web3 Warriors. I am David Karoma, your host. I go by Chrome in the metaverse. And it's really exciting. Today is actually the first episode of season 3. So each season is being capped off at 22 episodes, this being the 45th episode. I'm really excited to have Brown Eagle here as well. He's our first fellow Canadian and actually fellow Winnipegger to join me on this podcast here. As I often like to mention, it is a global podcast. We're definitely reaching out to different corners of the world and speaking with creators and builders in this blockchain space. We've spoken to people in the Middle East, in Europe, even South America, Southeast Asia, Africa, of course, and really just looking at the global impacts of this exciting new creator economy that's being built in Web3 and on the blockchain, and really seeing what's possible. So for today's episode, it's really kind of near and dear to my heart, and really, I think, an important topic for all Canadians and even all North Americans, I dare say, and that is the topic of Indigenous reconciliation and really decolonization, to speak to the topic of Brown Eagles, or the title of Brown Eagles' company, Decolonized Capital. Looking at a lot of the negative impacts that we've seen in Canada and also other countries around the world, but I'll speak specifically for our own, whether it's displacement, whether it's exclusion, whether it's the residential school system trying to essentially brainwash generations of Indigenous children, and also having all kinds of horrible abuse that we continue to uncover to this day. Looking at all of these impacts, there are multi-generational negative impacts that now, under the umbrella of reconciliation, we are actively trying to undo and make amends for where possible, and really create opportunities where that's possible as well. Now, we've talked to some creators already on the podcast that have looked at Indigenous artifacts, mostly in the African context. We had Kofi with the amazing African masks, or Zion using, African symbols and art styles in his African mandala projects to really take, culturally significant Indigenous art and put it on the blockchain and kind of demystify it, and in some cases destigmatize it, and really show how good and how kind of forward thinking these people or this culture was, or these artistic kind of pieces actually are. They're not as kind of quote unquote pagan as a lot of the colonial kind of mindset has put on some of these artifacts. So we've seen that, and that is a really awesome kind of aspect of reconciliation, I would say, taking those art pieces and demystifying them, reclaiming them, being able to create actual revenue out of them and help the community through that revenue. So that's amazing. But now, today, we're going to be looking at really how can blockchain support kind of the day-to-day finances and the day-to-day reconciliation of Indigenous communities, and looking at, especially in Canada here, we have a very interesting layered system of sovereignty, or of jurisdiction, you could say, when it comes to finances and the way that First Nations, tribal finances are handled. And so there's a big opportunity potentially for an Indigenous-led organization or company such as Decolonized Capital to really come in and use financial technology, use blockchain, use these tools that are newly available to us and to them, to really build out a new system that potentially is more equitable, is more accountable, is more transparent, and can actually push things forward in a good way, and in a way that's being led by the actual communities who need it most, and not just going to the government or going to certain big private entities hoping for more money, but actually being able to create something from the ground up. So it's a really exciting topic. I'm really interested in what Brown Eagle is working on right now. So thank you again, Brown Eagle, for joining. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about this topic and really pick your brain about the ways that blockchain can help our society, and by helping Indigenous people, decolonize their economies and also reconcile with the rest of Canada. It's a good thing for all of us, right? And it's a good thing for the world over, really. I think that a system like this being set up could have implications around the world, obviously. So with that, I could ramble on this topic probably all day. But Brown Eagle, I'd love to hear from you. And maybe before we get into Decolonized Capital specifically, could you give us just a little bit of background, what brought you to blockchain, and where are you coming from? And thank you again for joining the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. My name's Brown Eagle. So I got into blockchain pretty, it was during COVID, but what with my story is that I come from, lots of different life experiences and trials and tribulations in life. And just working in social services, working for the hospital, working for the government, help out with other individuals that don't have the tools and resources that regular Canadians do. It's very difficult for a lot of indigenous men and women from being exploited, being part of the murder and missing indigenous women and men in this country. A lot of mental illness that's being affected and impacted by the indigenous communities, and drug addiction, and being just in a vicious cycle of the justice system. So with that said, I was becoming a community helper, by starting men's groups, by facilitating healthy, safe environments for men to be able to share their stories and be able to ask for help, and be able to help out also in the hospital, as in individuals that been in for some type of injury, and then I just kind of support that bridge to gap that tools and resources that they need. Could be mental health and illness, could be drug addiction, or just even housing, just to be able to do that. But I got, unfortunately, let go with everything just because of COVID, and got locked down. So I started getting into blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, and just eventually just kind of learning a lot of the ecosystem of the blockchain technology, and eventually jumped on a blockchain company here in Winnipeg, and started doing that for about a year, and just realized there was like a lot of use cases that I saw that blockchain technology has that can be able to support the indigenous communities in a social impactful way. So I ended up just kind of leaving that, and end up creating my own company called Decolonized Capital, and be able to support social innovation and social finance through blockchain technology. It's so transparent, it's immutable, and just I like the fact that we are able to record history for the first time in human history for eternity, without no paper promises or being altered or damaged in any way. So I got into that and started the company here in Winnipeg, and really want to target the financial sector first. I'm targeting that first due to it's required to have 2 supporting documents to get a government photo ID, and the indigenous community really lacked the tools and resources to be able to support that photo ID. So just verify them on the blockchain, and with their identity, and by their band location, which is their reserve, put that on a blockchain, and be able to support banking as a service for these individuals. And I think that's a really powerful tool, just by supporting identity and be able to support any of their verification in wherever their identity needs to be needed. So.
No doubt. No, I can see that. And we've seen scenarios where, even for voting and things like that, I think it's a bigger problem in the States, but even in Canada where, they want to add certain ID requirements, maybe you need 2-3 different forms of ID, and that can be more difficult for people who maybe aren't driving or maybe don't have a bank account, active. So, and I like what you said about paper promises too, right? So we have in Canada the concept of treaty land and the concept of treaties that are to be respected and acknowledged and aligned with, which often are not, right? So that gets to your point about paper promises, which is the only way we had. It was really the only option we had pre-blockchain, right? And now you have the potential to create promises immutably through a smart contract, right? To actually say, well, you said on paper back in 1920 that you would honor this community with this amount of funds or with this allotment of land, whatever the case may be, right? Maybe you can take those kind of transactions and actually bring them into a blockchain scenario, into a smart contract that's on the blockchain, and actually, again, if the finances were moving on the blockchain as well, the funds, like once it's set in stone and you're getting that specific percentage of funds from X project, that's it. It's going to happen forevermore, and we don't have to go back to, some judge and say, hey, they said they were going to do this and they didn't do this, or they didn't consult. So I love that. I love that idea of no more paper promises. Now we can make immutable promises. So please tell us a little bit more about what is Decolonized Capital. I know it's obviously in the startup phases right now. You're doing a lot of traveling to different blockchain events and really, bending the ear of a lot of experts in the space. So where are you at right now, and what's kind of the trajectory of what you're building here?
Absolutely. So we're developing our own blockchain, be able to use the ERC20 tokens,
Mm,
be able to privatize our blockchain. But what we're be able to do is the concept would be able to tokenize, the indigenous people's identity, but also tokenizing just also the minerals. The minerals on these reserves, they always get used by outside entities, and be able to protect our own minerals, our own land, our own waters, and especially our own identity. And I think identity is one of our biggest key points in our culture, and be able to create, First Nations in the metaverse. There's a lot of indigenous families that are split apart from child family services from Canada, and just from the 60 scoops in the residential school survivors. So be able to reconnect these families to the metaverse by verifying them on a blockchain, by some ancestry through the blockchain, and by be able to record who they are, what nation they're from, what treaty they're from, and what is their ethnical background, if they're Cree, Ojibwe, Dene, OG Cree, whatever the case may be. But back with the minerals is that, there's a lot of outside entities that's coming onto the lands and be able to extract the minerals. Could be potash, gravel, it could be soil. We have billions and billions of dollars worth of these minerals, and we have these outside entities taking these minerals without any exchange, right? So they're stealing from literally from the land once again.
mm,
So by holding these people accountable, by just tokenizing that, putting it on the blockchain. Say we have like $1 billion worth of soil, or even just gravel. Another great use case is gravel, and be able to show like, hey, like we have all this gravel. We have a company or on contractor that wants to buy the gravel. However, it will be kind of contradicting ourselves, because what if this gravel is being used to, lock up inmates from a prison perspective? So we're able to show who's buying the gravel, where the gravel is going, and what the gravel is being used for. So we would like to use our minerals and our resources in a traditional value, in a traditional cultural way. So it would be kind of moving backwards if we did sell the gravel and it's going towards prisons. And but yet in Canada, the high percentage of indigenous people are being prisoned, right?
mm.
So it just kind of shows that, like, look, we want to be responsible for our minerals. We want to be able to show and see what our resources are being used for. So it's like one of those type of concepts that could be a very powerful thing moving forward in the indigenous communities.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So you've got on the kind of grassroots community level, that kind of sovereignty, that kind of being able to create a system where it's like, we have these minerals on our land, and if you want them, this is the system you have to use, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of taking the power away from maybe more private entities, obviously banks, and those kind of traditional loaning systems, and being able to actually have a new system that where it's like the indigenous community is kind of setting the rules. So on that side, there's the financial sovereignty, but then you're also talking about actually line of sight towards the supply chain because of it being on blockchain. So that's kind of a supply chain benefit that you get there as well. So it's a lot of different angles. And I heard you mention the ERC20 tokens, which, so would it make the Decolonized Capital blockchain as essentially a layer 2 kind of on top of Ethereum, but obviously removing gas fees, probably, trying to make it as seamless as possible. Yeah. How is that? How's the infrastructure looking for you? And what's kind of your next needs? I'm thinking a dev. Where are you going with it?
Yeah, definitely smart contracts and using devs, full stacks like Solidity, clearly, and especially utilizing layer 2 protocols. What I like about layer 2 protocols with ZK rollups is that, it's a fixed gas price. So, the token can be valued on the network demand and be a fixed gas price. So it's like $1 per user, but then every time there's a new user that's onboarded, that dollar would be split up to the next user. So like a transaction would be $1, the next user would be, a transaction would be split up at next to next, and follow so forth on.
Mm.
And that would be split and put in the gas fees a lot lower. But if we're going to be creating our own development of blockchain, I think we would like to actually just take the gas fees out. A couple of concepts that I came up with, if we have to be able to use gas fees, is that a way of kind of giving back, kicking back, like kind of like an air miles type of concept, and be able to start like infrastructural accounts and be able to put those gas fees into these accounts instead of monetizing on these gas fees and capitalizing on these gas fees. That there's lots of infrastructure that needs to be done in these northern communities. So like fixed roads, clean water, digital infrastructure, more towers, Starlinks, whatever the case may be, right? So we'll be able to put these gas fees into a nice pot and be able to generate enough revenue to be able to start another side project with infrastructure or economic development. That's what I love about layer 2 protocols, also to be able to incentivize human behavior and be able to reward people, incentivize people on, healthy spending limits, good positive behavioral lifestyles, healthier lifestyles, and I think this could really also like remove a lot of corruption and on the internal side of things too, especially with predatory financial institutions like money marts
Oh
being on
man,
these reserves.
it's crazy.
And then they're on these reserves, and if we kind of replace these financial institutions, we're cutting somebody's pocket off, right? So
Right.
be able to replace that and by incentivizing them just to do more healthier lifestyles and more healthier spending choices and whatnot, so forth. So
Yeah, that's really neat. And it's funny because you hear, obviously the more dystopian side of that with the social credit system and the CBDCs and all this like idea that government wants to be able to tell you what you should and shouldn't spend your money on, or, and that's the kind of negative side of what people are looking at from the digital currency, the central bank digital currencies, that is. But on the flip side, to your point, when, it's kind of there's buy-in from the community at the community level and the rules of the road are so transparently set up from the outset, and you're saying we want to encourage savings. We want to encourage maybe not even savings, but spending responsibly, so if you keep your spending under a certain amount for a month, we'll reward you with, X percentage or whatever the case may be. And that's a really cool concept to think about. I do want to just give a quick plug for anybody who's watching us in the live chat. Thank you for tuning in on Twitch or YouTube. If you do have any questions at all, feel free to ask them in the live chat. We do love to encourage any conversations. And with this being a really interesting and exciting startup, which I said is kind of near to my heart, being from Winnipeg, and Brown Eagle's from Winnipeg, but it's a very national project that he's taking on which will impact indigenous communities across the country, really. So if this sounds interesting to you, you can reach out to Brown Eagle on Twitter at Brown Eagle North, or check out his website at decolonizedcapital.com. And we definitely would love to hear from you. So just a quick shout out to any of our listeners live or during the after pre-recorded podcast. We definitely would love to hear from you if you're interested in taking on this project and helping us out. It's really exciting. So looking at, you mentioned kind of the metaverse part of things, and obviously here on Web3 Warriors, we always love looking at the metaverse. It's kind of an extension of the gaming space in some ways. How do you think indigenous communities will respond to that idea that you said, which is the fact that they are so dispersed, right? Because of 60s scoop, because of residential schools, because of just the urban-rural divide. Many people go to cities to find better opportunities and all of that typical old story, right? What do you think, A, that they'll embrace the idea of coming to community in the metaverse, and B, how does it, functionally help, people?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think I've already talked with some First Nation groups, and they actually really love the idea, be able to start that reconnection with the individuals that are missing their families. There's a lot of families that were torn apart through the decades as Canada was being built, and these new laws and regulations, and that the treaties were broken, and these birth alerts, and it's unfortunate that me as a statistic also, but being a birth alert, but being ripped away from your family since birth and being put into the foster care and then no longer having touch with your family, right? So I think it's a really very cool, and there's a unique value to that, be able to put these nations onto the metaverse and be able to have, their own, let's say like their own world, their own node, and be able to have, Cree Nation Treaty 4 and, Peguis and their reserve, right? Like there's a lot of families that are ripped away across this country, and be able to have that, function, be able to reconciliate with each other, to be able to ask questions, to know their culture, to know their identity, to know where they came from, to share each other's stories, because nobody else is really listening to them besides we only listen to ourselves. and be able to connect with another person that's been through the same thing. Is I think it's really brings a lot of emotional value to that. Um, I think that's going to be a very, very neat, very cool tool to have, especially putting that in a metaverse. I think there has to be a simplified education behind that, just to really show how it works, not to really overwhelm them of how like the technology works. They're very interested in like how does this work. Like
Mhm.
it's a nation that's that frowns upon like um, adoption from the Canadian society, right? And because
Mhm.
we've been that trust is broken, right? So, individual like myself to be able to bridge that education and be able to say, like, look, there's a really unique tool that we can be able to reconsider and be able to put ourselves into the blockchain, put ourselves into the metaverse, so we can reconnect with our families, with our culture, with our identity, with each other. Being connected with each other is really important into the culture, and especially bringing our children back home. I think that's one of the most important things too.
That's man, I get goosebumps just hearing it. Honestly, it's like it needs to happen tomorrow for real. Yeah, and the best part of that is when you do set up that space for these communities, you have full ownership of how you decorate the space, how you build the space, how
Mhm.
you create opportunities within the space. Yet that space can include a whole gallery of artists from your community. Let's say Peguis, for example, because that's an indigenous community that I have personally visited and actually have friends who are from the community. And what's up, Zale Serpent? Shout out, man. That's a fellow Manitoban as well, who's also of indigenous background. So thanks for joining in the chat, man. Really love for you to share any thoughts you have. But to your point, just the fact that you could create, so let's say Peguis First Nation sets up a place in the metaverse specifically for their community, built by, whether it's their tribal council or just some young people
Mhm.
from the community who want to take this on, because it really is that simple and it's pretty fun. If you've ever played Minecraft or Roblox, you can jump into voxels and create one of these spaces. You can actually create one for free, but the limit on that one is, I think, 10 people can jump into it, but it could be a good starting. So again, just throwing this out there, any listeners who are interested, you can reach out to me directly at Web3 Warriors on Twitter or Web3Warriors at gmail.com. We'd definitely be able to put you in touch with Brown Eagle. But sorry, thinking out loud here. But Peguis First Nation has a metaverse space. You could actually set up an art gallery at that metaverse space that anybody can jump into, drop into, and purchase the art direct in the metaverse space. And 98%, 99% of the proceeds go direct to the community. So this is something that could really be set up like within 24, 48 hours, relatively easily, assuming, you just get approvals from the artists that are involved and you get one or two people to actually do the building on the groundwork, of the actual metaverse space. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And Brown Eagle, whatever you need, I really want us to push this forward. I think that the blockchain side of what you're doing is massive just in and of itself, and then I think the metaverse side of what you're doing is equally massive as a separate kind of project, right? So
Absolutely.
it's an amazing vision, and I do feel like it requires a little bit more community buy-in. So to that
Mhm.
point, I know I asked you about it, and you said on the metaverse side they're excited, so that's awesome. When you speak to them about blockchain in general, what's the perception kind of within the First Nation or Indigenous communities so far?
Well, they definitely like to learn more about it. Like when I do my presentations, I kind of give the problem, I give them the solution, and then how we're going to roll out the solution, and they just really grasp on the fact that there's no paper promises. Like we once there's recorded on the blockchain like a digital identity. It shows who they are. Say somebody like from Manitoba that just moved to BC. They lost all their IDs or whatever, whatnot, and it's a time consuming to get all their IDs back again, or somebody needs some type of their medication. We are able to support their digital identity instantaneously without them going to a social service area and be able to put in an application, and then they have to wait for, like, I've worked in social services for quite some time, and you know it takes like 4 to 6 months for that application to come back to receive if they got accepted or not, right? And we're losing touch on this individual within a day. Like we can't have that, right? Like that needs to be there needs to be a new system in place.
Yeah.
So we are able to verify that information like instantaneously, like within 5 seconds, to show who they are and what type of medication they need, or what type of social services they need, right? I think that's a really powerful tool,
That is.
especially with these other individuals that are also working in social services, and they're getting there's CFS agencies that still getting paid by a check, right? And I don't know how they're still getting paid by the check, but that's a pretty old mechanism with today's
Yeah,
world.
can't even do pre-authorized debit. Come on.
Exactly, right? And some of these individuals don't even have bank accounts, so they have to go to the money mart and be able to sacrifice their value to receive their value, or they even have to go to when they go to the bank, they just blatantly get refused. But even if they do get accepted, they have to wait till 3 to 5 business days, right? And they got kids to feed, they got bills to pay, and rent that's due. So we are able to support, a digital wallet, put that in your digital wallet, and you can just instantaneously have your funds without no cost, no middleman fees, no gas fees, or nothing.
No
Just
doubt.
one of those great use cases that solves a lot of issues that the indigenous people are impacted by.
And on the ground, I think what you need is the buy-in from the indigenous communities, because the more you can use just your digital wallet and not even need to off-ramp it into fiat, that's when you really hit the revolution, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing more of. I do want to acknowledge Zale's really great point that he had here. So he's saying the challenge with interacting with communities that have historic trauma is that they become skeptical of anything new and innovative. So it takes time to communicate how much utility and potential there is. And he used the example of having 300 members quit his community because he introduced a new chat module that they thought was a virus or spam. So it's just an example where, it is a little bit more sensitive when dealing with communities that historically, I think you mentioned this as well, lost a lot of trust, kind of with what we would call mainstream society, or so-called, the Canadian society versus the First Nations as sovereign communities. So how do we kind of bridge that gap? I think to your point, it has to do with people from the community saying, with confidence, this is an awesome technology that is going to help us achieve, reconciliation and create our own economic opportunities. But how do you kind of tackle that? Because it is a great point Zale brings up.
Definitely. Well, Decolonized Capital is a First Nation blockchain company. So like with that said, we are doing a lot more better jobs than what the Canadian government can provide. Like, we are so dependent on their systems and their adoptions, but we now have the tools and resources to be able to create our own systems and to adopt in our own ways, and be able to have a First Nation company, be able to give back to the community by having your full consent on your own data and having full consent of your own assets. You are becoming your own bank, and you have full. This is not Facebook. This is no login that you give us your information and whatnot, and then we keep your information. Your information is your information. That is your data, and that's what we are the opposite of what Canadian government and any other banking systems mechanisms that they're doing. What we're doing is we're giving the power back to you and be able to have full control of your own assets, your own data, your own information, and be able to have full consent when somebody's asking for it too. With these trusted entities like banks, hospitals, social services, you are your own you're on your own bank, and you can have your own full consent of it all. We are not somebody that keeps your information and monetizes off your data.
That's right. Very important point. Yeah, and I think that we're going to be on a precipice of a new era where people understand the value of their data, and people don't want to be just giving out data. I mean, we've already seen it with Facebook metrics and things like that. It's skewing older, right? Because younger people more and more are just like, no, I don't want to tell Facebook what I'm doing every day, or have all these crazy algorithms that like target me with expert precision and read my mind basically and tell me I need all these things that I don't need, these crazy advertisements. Yeah, so that's a great point, and that this is an advantage of true Web3 organizations. Do not pilfer your data, essentially. And there are some that are on the blockchain but are still doing data games, essentially, and trying to monetize data where they can. And I think we should frown upon that, and we should be looking under the hood of Web3 companies to say, are you still playing those old Web2 data games and monetizing my data, or do I have true sovereign ownership and I know exactly what I'm giving and getting. None of these games. And Zale will definitely have this recorded, man. Every podcast goes on to the podcast networks, and the video will also be on Twitch for a while and on YouTube forever. So no worries, and drive safely. Yeah, no, really great points. So on the ground level embracing, right, and the ground level adoption, which is definitely going to be key to kind of having this new decolonized economic engine, essentially, right? How easy is it going to be, and this is going to that point I was just making with digital wallet payments, how do you view needing to create the network effect? Because obviously the dev work is kind of work number one, make the technology and make sure it works. But then how do you actually then do the it's almost marketing or PR work, essentially, in the community, to show them the real sovereign advantages of using blockchain? Because if it gets to a place where, to your point, these digital wallets are all they need, and the places that are local to them actually accept payment in the digital wallet, which they should, because they'll probably get better rates and actually get better overall revenue at the end of the day that they can then turn into fiat themselves as a business, right? So yeah, it's just making that case. And the more I think about it, it sounds like a no-brainer, but I'm also completely biased and definitely steeped in this space, But I think to people who are outsiders, there's still some skepticism about blockchain. And then there's just the clear nuts and bolts, dollars and cents, why is this the way to go? So sorry, I'm throwing a lot at you there, but how easy do you think that's going to be to set up?
Well, to set up, I think it's really figuring out where we want to have that first social impact first, right? So getting in touch with the communities and going through each community and just asking, identifying, where what are the targets, where you needed help, what can we do to put this on a technical level and be able to have that social impact first, right? With creating each node per First Nation. They have 650 nations in Canada, and be able to support their own blockchain on there, and they have full consent on their own blockchain. They can see every type of transaction. They can see their own value. They see their own pot, their own bucket full of minerals or assets, or all sorts of assets, property, whatever, right? Just identifying with the banding council, with the elders, and be able to have that traditional waterfall coming down into on a technical level, to be able to support their cultural ways, just on a technical aspect, on a technical perspective on it. So be able to have a blockchain have their own flavor of their needs, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you're talking about, when just picturing each node for each nation, and within that node, a very clear accounting of the resources they have on their land, a very clear accounting of obviously tribal governance, probably, and
Yes,
how,
absolutely.
how those revenues are being dispersed. Oh man. So what do you think about the political side of things, right? So, maybe, and I'm not assuming the worst, but I'm just saying, for devil's advocates arguments, maybe you have tribal councils that don't want to open up their books, or don't want to, put those accounts and those revenues on the blockchain, essentially. And to your point, I guess that was your initial point. You have to get that buy-in from an initial community and kind of have a proof of concept, essentially. Is that what you're saying? So how easy do you think that's going to be when it comes to the politics, right? Because ultimately you're going to butt up against some politics for sure.
Absolutely. And I haven't yet bumped into that yet, but I would say, once a First Nation does jump on board and be able to utilize the blockchain technology for their purposes, just look at the books, look at the transparency that it brings. It's immutable. It can hold all sorts of information, data, and all sorts of assets without being damaged, removed, and completely removing corruption, right? So we'll be able to give back to the communities in a nice traditional cultural way, and be able to have see the land of the trust, be able to fulfill its needs with the communities. Who knows, eventually we can get clean water without government support. We can be able to get these roads and infrastructure without any government support.
Oh,
We can do
that's
this on our
beautiful.
own. if we're able to have our own, we control our own regions and territories, we should be able to have our own indigenous businesses, right? But we have these outside entities coming into our lands and monetizing our own people, our own resources. So be able to felicitate our own, our own accounts with economic development accounts, northern community accounts with having our own food supply. It shouldn't be cost like $50 for a milk to buy,
Crazy.
right? And it's insane. So with that said, like we be able to replace total infrastructure that's bought by the Northwest Territories, or the Hudson Bay, I should say,
Hmm.
and they control the infrastructure. So with that said, the food prices can go up whenever they want it, feel like that it goes up, right? So if we can control our own systems and have our own adoptions and be able to come to a reasonable price with a consensus of like, well, this is what should be at value, and we can all live together and be able to have our own sovereignty in complete transparent way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a vision. Looking at that point about supply chain, right? And this idea that these northern communities, and sometimes it's not even that far north. Like I've driven up to a couple reserves that weren't that out of the way, and you go to their grocery stores and wow, it's like literally 2-3 times more expensive on everything from bread to milk to whatever the case may be. So what's your take on that supply chain? And, we've heard for decades, oh, it's just because it's so out of the way and, it costs that much more to move the goods up to these different communities. And some of them that are super remote, I could kind of understand that. But yeah, how does blockchain possibly solve that? And do you think that there are other shenanigans at play when it comes to those pricing?
Well, we definitely got a team that's doing a lot of research on a daily basis of how we can tackle that and solutionize that issue. Right now, we're figuring out ways to be able to uh, do it in a professional way by replacing, certain things that can be able to make indigenous people in a livable manner. It's only one, I believe it's only the one entity that's up there that controls the whole infrastructure. And, I'm not here to name names or anything, but, they're definitely a very powerful group, and be able to, they control all the infrastructure, food, water, gas, financial institutions, everything, right? And just trying to figure out ways that we can in a obviously a traditional value way, to be able to show like it doesn't have to be like this. We have a new system, and be able to create our own systems to be able to control our own food prices. It's pretty tough. It's pretty challenging experience, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
And be able to try to come to terms of how do we get they're thinking of like, it doesn't have to be like this. Like, it doesn't have to be high valued prices for food. It's so scarce, and it's pretty predatory. It should be crime,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it is what it is. And it shouldn't be like this. And it's been like this for decades, but
Yeah.
just trying to come up with the right minds to be on board and to be able to tackle this issue for sure.
Yeah, and I saw there was some indigenous-owned grocery store, and I believe it was Churchill, I want to say, but it might have been in Northwest Territories outside of Manitoba. But yeah, they were kind of competing with that monopoly you mentioned, and so far it seems so good, but we'll see. Yeah, it's really exciting. Shout out to Zale, another awesome contribution here. So he said, if strong indigenous role models are leading effective projects in the community, then the more receptive it will be for community members. And chief and council leaders are always invested in what the community's doing. So he seems to think, community takes the lead, sees the value in it, and ultimately chief and council are going to have to follow suit. I think ideally you find a really cool, innovative chief and council that want to actually lead and help the community adopt it. That'd be cool. But to your point, Zale, I think often it has to be the other way around, right? Kind of grassroots and community led, and then eventually the politicians and the elected leaders decide, oh yeah, this is great, we should try to do something with it. So you think that's the route you're going? And do you have a specific community in mind, or a handful of options that you think are kind of going to be more receptive? Maybe you don't want to name them specifically, but even regionally if you want.
Yeah, definitely got some community leaders that are involved, and some community leaders that really want to be able to take this head on for sure. With Decolonized Capital, we're creating a board of elders and be able to have that traditional value drip down with the rest of the with the company, and be able to have a good more narrative and a good navigation of how we're going to utilize our tools and resources that we have access to, and be able to do it in a nice cultural setting, and be able to have these indigenous elders on board to be able to give us the real deep insight of like what we really need to tackle and how do we do it right, and be able to put that on a technical perspective. Definitely put in the grassroots first. I think that's a huge key component. um, uh, that's one of the first things that we for sure brought up in this company, and be able to get into community and make it a community-based project, and be able to have the the real community leaders that are entrenched and to know what needs to be done first, right? So
That's awesome, man. And I love the board of elders concept. So being such a, bleeding edge, front of the fintech wave kind of company, right? To then on the same token see and acknowledge the importance of elders, some might see that as a bit of a conflict maybe, and maybe the elders would be potentially out of their depth or not really, on the tech wave. How do you view that? I think from an obviously culturally perspective, I understand and revere the concept of elders holding that traditional cultural knowledge and infusing it into the company, So how has it been, I guess, already, as you do that outreach to these elders when you're speaking about this tech wave, is it kind of just like eyes glazed over, or is it like excitement, Yeah, I'm just curious about like from a demographic perspective. It's an
definitely,
interesting contrast.
they're very interested. I try not to overwhelm them with the information. I just let them know like this is what we're doing, this is what we would like to accomplish, and how could we do it in a setting of in a traditional way. They're very it's a big eye opener for them to be able to say like we can actually do this, like this is possible. And it's like, yes, like we do have the mechanisms and the tools and resources and the development team behind us to be able to push this forward. And they're very excited. Some are very excited, but some also need a lot more education on it, which is totally fine. I try not to overwhelm them. I can be really technical. I can get, this is a big passion of mine, right? So
Right.
I get really go down in the rabbit's hole, but I just let them know like, hey, like this is who we are. This is what I stand for, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. And how could we do this while we have all these other tools and resources, like especially with blockchain, and to be able to simplify that education. I always tell them like, this is a financial revolution right now, and we have a chance to be a participant in this financial revolution. But yet, we've been excluded just from society itself, right? And we have a chance to be on the leaderboard here with this financial revolution, because eventually this is only going to be the rich man's games. This is all open source protocols right now, and eventually it's not going to be like that. As soon as everything starts to get regulated, and all these other exchanges are going down, and just with these new laws and regulations that are coming up ahead in 2023, me as a First Nations in this blockchain community, I don't see too many First Nations in this community at all, and it kind of brings a little worry to my heart, because
Mm.
me as a First Nation, I'm the only one here, and I don't feel singled out or anything. I'm a strong leader. I'm a voice for my people, and we are here to stay, especially with this technology. But I see a lot of other groups catching on really fast, and I see these little armies kind of building up, and it's like we need to get our own little army going on too in the space, right? And get our First Nations on board with computer science, computer programming, all that type of stuff that can be able to be part of that blockchain ecosystem. So I always tell the indigenous elders to be able to like, hey, we need to get into this tech space. I emphasize that because we have a chance to be part of this evolution that's happened.
No doubt, no doubt. So what is the position for someone like me, non-Indigenous, but fully on board with what you're building, and obviously eager to help in any way that I can? I know, to your point, a lot of so-called mainstream Canadian, or whatever you want to call it, non-Indigenous Canadians, unfortunately, maybe have their own perspectives. But how does someone like myself kind of assist with Decolonized Capital and encourage others to support what you're doing? Because I do think when the system is put in place and when indigenous communities are able to actually have their own kind of sovereign system that is built on the blockchain and making everything a lot more accountable with their resources and their governance, that will be a good thing for all of Canada, right? And ultimately, I actually believe strongly that it will be a very good thing for the entire world, because there are many communities, indigenous communities, others that have just been shut out for whatever reason in their own corners of the world, that could essentially adopt the exact system you're talking about, where they itemize their resources, they create more accountability for their governance, because corruption is a problem, especially in these other areas. I don't think it's as big of a problem here with indigenous communities, not any more so than any other communities. But I think that is an awesome value add, right? So yeah, I mean, how does it grow from here?
We'll definitely obviously support, promotional support, getting everybody on board, all First Nations on board. Is about like a little bit under 2 million First Nations, but meeting just like 5% of that to be on board and to show them like, look, obviously validating the product and validating what we're doing is really actually happening, and bringing a change in our communities, and be able to show that, and be able to create our own world, create our own blockchains, and be able to put those in separate entities on their First Nations, and be able to do that and roll that out. But as a non-Indigenous as yourself, definitely support additional. We always love the additional support, promotion, getting our company out there. Even getting involved in the communities, and be able to get DC, Decolonized Capital, into these communities, and be able to enroll with computer science, computer programming, simplifying education, traveling all over the country with nation to nation, to be able to show them what we're doing and what we stand for and what we're trying to accomplish. That brings a lot of value.
Awesome. I will try to do that. And I definitely think on the metaverse side, I would love to help build that out. And
Absolutely.
I think there's some low hanging fruit that you could actually do to actually create some revenue for Decolonized Capital and some of your bigger aspects of the initiative. Zale coming through with another great comment here. So he's heard a lot from community members who criticize the power consumption angle of blockchain. Well, he's saying ledgers, but I guess also just the mining. I know we heard Ethereum recently went from proof of work to proof of stake for this specific reason, trying to push back on some of the environmental FUD, as we like to call it here, and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But there's, power consumption is a real thing. When I look at the traditional financial institutions, I think they consume a lot more power in total than even Bitcoin mining does. But that doesn't mean, doesn't exclude the fact that it's an argument. So have you heard that argument, for one? And for two, how do you feel about the environmental concerns around blockchain?
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of ever since with proof of work, and then the merge, and the chain beacon going into proof of stake. In the Indigenous communities have the second largest cleaning power in Canada. So with that said, BI recycling that power. I don't know too much about that space. I don't want to get into that space too much, but it's definitely something that we do have the tools and resources to be able to minimize that power, and be able to utilize greener in that greener space. But definitely a space that I need to get more into, and definitely understand a lot more with that education.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's really easy ways too for the system you're talking about to actually incorporate some kind of carbon credit system in there as well, where you're actually purchasing carbon credits as part of the overall financial setup that you create. But just throwing that out there as an opportunity. But even just like you're saying, just being more mindful of nature, being more mindful of how you're using the resources, and then where those resources are going, and if they're going to have more negative, whether it's social or environmental impacts, and actually caring about the supply line. I think, yeah, it's just an amazing way to handle resources that exist on treaty land, or on reserve land, I should say. Really cool. So on the NFT side of things, right? And I know you're not too deep into, the day-to-day NFT community like we are here on Web3 Warriors, but I can't help but wonder, we know that First Nations people and Indigenous people, many are amazing artists, right? And we know that their art has impacted Canada in a variety of ways, from our very flag, which has a leaf on it, in many ways incorporating that nature, the love of nature and the understanding of its importance, to all kinds of art that has been in some cases appropriated, unfortunately, and in other cases rightfully lifted up to the amazing station that it deserves, like Inuit art, for example, and some others. How do you view the potential for the community, Indigenous community, to put that art on the blockchain and create revenue for themselves? And then specifically with Decolonized Capital, would you consider, pulling together a certain group of artists to essentially create an NFT collection that is the purpose of the collection is to raise funds for your project? Just going to put that out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think NFTs are great for, it could be huge for the Indigenous communities, the artists. There's so much unrepresented artists, Indigenous artists out here in Canada, and they don't get enough exposure. They don't get enough revenue. I know quite a few curators and NFT galleries that I always tell them to reach out to these Indigenous communities, because they have such beautiful work, such colorful styles, especially even on the beading side of things, but be able to create a new type of revenue on the blockchain or the NFT space, and be able to have royalties. Like, that's like a no-brainer. And you can even rent out your art, and you can even create an art, mint it, and be able to create a utility with it. Like, there's so much use cases with this type of stuff, and that they could, it's mind-blowing, like how you can be able to have the income that comes with it, but the utility of helping. Like, I really wanted to, say, hook up with an artist, create their artist, mint it, but then have utility of meeting that artist with the dinner or something like that, and Jets tickets or something like that, right?
That's awesome.
But that Jets tickets will get them the exposure that they would need, right? And then an art will get traded or even get bought and sold, and then each sold item of that art goes on. That person makes a revenue or makes it royalties on each one, just like how music does.
Right.
I think this is huge for the Indigenous communities to be able to have a new stream of income for themselves. I always try to say, don't worry about really how it works. It's gonna work, right? It just, as long as you're getting that income, let it happen, right? And I think it's a great tool for the Indigenous community on the art perspective of things, and I think that should be really, really usul for them. So I highly suggest get a hold of me or get a hold of Web Warriors and be able to figure out how we can connect on that, especially all Indigenous artists. I would love to help you guys out.
Awesome. Well, I know Zale's already working on a little something, and I've spoken to Chris Classio, who is not Indigenous, but he is actively works in northern Winnipeg and is connected with a lot of the Indigenous community out there. And we have our platform Web3 Winnipeg, which is kind of I would call it the local arm of Web3 Warriors out here. And we've already done one workshop, and we'll be continuing to kind of reach out to the community and build. But I'd love to continue this offline, Brown Eagle, and I think we have an awesome opportunity here to really pull together a meeting of the minds and try to build a really cool NFT collection and a gallery in the metaverse for your project specifically, and we can do this collectively and also benefit the artists who would contribute. Absolutely. Obviously they would get the lion's share of revenue, but overall it would just be an amazing kind of way to kind of make a splash with Decolonized Capital and the potential of the blockchain in Canada, specifically for reconciliation and for Indigenous communities. So this is really awesome. I'm really excited that Zale was able to join us here for this conversation, because he's one of those guys I've been pulling slowly. He's got some NFTs out there too, so it's really cool. And so look forward to building more and jumping into the metaverse as well. Awesome. So do you have, maybe I don't need to ask, but what's your favorite blockchain right now? I like to ask people who are out here building in the space, and why.
So I really like the Ethereum blockchain. I'm a big Ether maximist pretty much, but the ecosystem, not like, I do like blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, but my favorite one is Chainlink. It's part of the Ethereum blockchain, and Chainlink's really important for the infrastructure around Ethereum blockchain. They do a lot of decos, which is digital identity also, but it's also a different type of digital identity that supports different utilities and mechanisms. They support, randomness game and steady randomness, and I think that's really important, especially in the gaming industry and gamifications. They also support interoperabilities with side chains and multi chains, and be able to have those trusted bridges that can go across from one chain to another. And I think that's really important with interoperabilities. Another one is
that was
really
Chainlink. Sorry,
Chainlink, yes,
right,
Chainlink from Sergey Nazarov. I'm a big Sergey
sure.
Nazarov fan.
Yeah.
I do like Cardano. I think he's one of the trusted blockchains out there. Also, Charles Hawkinson. I'm very favorable of him, keeping a keen eye, and he's just released another blockchain called Midnight with the token called Dust, and that's going to be for censorship, non-censorship, and be able to help people to have that type of voice and be able to not be torn down by the, other shady blockchains that are out there that kind of censorship other blockchains. It goes right down in a rabbit hole, but I would suggest some research on Midnight and Dust. It's pretty unique project.
That's interesting. How recently did Charles do that? I'm only familiar with Cardano.
About last month.
Oh, okay, yes. So just 1 month ago, eh? There you go.
Yes.
It's interesting. There's a lot of people that are not happy with Charles because they just want to see that Cardano coin go up. And a lot of the Cardano supporters were kind of acting like the coin was going to go up. So I think they lost a lot of the investor crew. But I personally do like what Cardano's done in East Africa, specifically in Kenya, I think Ethiopia. I do love the idea of that micro community level, micro economy, essentially. I think that's what Web3 is all about. We actually just had a room on that yesterday talking about Web3 microeconomies on Clubhouse with the Dream Conduit. I really think that's the heart and soul of the blockchain, right? Is the idea that you don't need the big influencers, you don't need the big multi-billion-dollar companies to support you, you don't need thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. All you need is your project, a very clear vision of the value that your project is presenting, and then collect your supporters and create your own little microeconomy. That's it. Like nothing else matters, and that's the beauty of the blockchain, right?
And I think Cosmos is doing a really good job on that also, because it's a very community-based blockchain.
Yeah, I like Cosmos. I was a big fan of Cosmos. I think that's another one. And they have a very good eye towards the metaverse as well, because they are kind of looking at that interoperability question as well, to your point. That'll be my next question on the metaverse. Have you had any opportunities to jump into any of the metaverses? Do you have a favorite metaverse yet, or you're still kind of exploring options?
Definitely still exploring options. I've been kind of doing a little fun here, a little fun there. I've been doing it more on the fun side of things and exploring a lot, but it's very fun stuff. And I've been a couple of times kind of get daisy a little bit, but it's good. I on the Web3 perspective on it, definitely need to do like a lot more to drop the funness out and be able to try get something, see if I can try to develop and try to correlate what I'm doing with the metaverse. But yeah, it's definitely a good time though. It's definitely a good time. And I think once the First Nations start to see what's really happening in the metaverse, it'll be a game changer for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's what we're gonna try to push that out there. Specifically for what I was thinking with the gallery space and really just trying to increase adoption within Indigenous communities, I definitely would recommend looking at Voxels. I believe their site is now voxels.com. And it's really cool because it has all the full Web3 functionality. It's built on the Ethereum blockchain, or Polygon specifically, layer 2. But it also has, the ability to just put in art, and put up pictures and then be able to sell the pictures, whether it's on an NFT site or even in a Web2 site. You could sell through your art. Just through links in the little gallery space that you can set up. So that's what we're going to be reaching out to you about, Brown Eagle. I'm going to get Chris online. I think Zale's down, and we're going to have a meeting of the minds, and we're going to build something cool for Indigenous art and for Decolonized Capital. That's what's up. It's going down.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there any other questions from the chat? Please, this is your time to put them in. And our last question I have for you, Brown Eagle, is, and you've spoken to this a little bit already, but what do you say to the blockchain naysayers, whether it's certain politicians, tribal council maybe not wanting to embrace it, or just certain community members that have environmental concerns, other concerns about blockchain? Why should those uncertainties and doubts be put aside and embrace what Decolonized Capital is trying to build here?
For sure. Well, there's a unique value in the blockchain industry and the rest of its ecosystem. You should really deeply look at what it really is and what it can do for the indigenous community. Blockchain technology can do 10 or 100 times more effectively than anything else in existence. And this is the first time in human history that something's being recorded for eternity, right? Like if we had our treaties placed on the blockchain, we'll be able to keep our lands, we'll be able to keep the way a lot of boundaries and be able to keep sovereignty within ourselves, right? There's a lot of brokenness in the communities from the government just breaking their side of the deals, right, and be able to hold them accountable. I think we can be able to hold accountability through code and be able to trust technology that it's going to be adopted, and we have a chance to be a participant in this new technology. And especially as a First Nation company, we have a huge leverage. Like I'm in the door, got myself in the door, got myself in the industry, and there's no other First Nation, far as I know, that's doing what we're doing, especially on a global scale, to be able to solve social impacts, to solve social innovation. So
that's what's up. I'm so excited for you, man. And I look forward to continuing to see how Decolonized Capital builds out, both on the blockchain and in the metaverse, and helping out wherever I can. And it was really awesome to be able to speak to someone who's from Winnipeg, from Manitoba, building something that's really going to help our communities, our country more broadly. And it's really exciting opportunities. And special shout out to Zale and anybody else watching in the chat. Sasha, saw you there as well. Appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll be back. Actually, we're taking next weekend off because it is Christmas Eve, but we will be back the weekend after that, which is actually New Year's Eve on the 31st with Waconomy, and that's a really cool project that's looking at basically almost kind of doing similar to what Brown Eagle's talking about, but looking at the African continent and building out that digital landscape, the new creator economy for communities and creators, both in Africa and as part of the diaspora. So that's going to be a really cool episode on December 31st. Be sure to drop in for that. And I hope everybody has an amazing Merry Christmas and enjoy your holidays. Happy holidays. And thank you again, Brown Eagle. Did you have any final words you wanted to add before we sign off?
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that. Please check out the website, decolonizedcapital.com, my LinkedIn, Brown Eagle. Look forward to hopefully connecting.
All right, awesome. We'll be in touch. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, catch me in the metaverse. I'll see you around. Take care.